Apple forces the signing of applications in macOS Sequoia 15.1. Apple removes ability to run unsigned apps in macOS 15.1. Bugger intentional? macOS 15.1 completely removes ability to launch unsigned applications. macOS is losing a big feature. Okay, so the last one is a parody, but it brought to my attention an issue that seems to be rife with misinformation, mostly confirmation bias from people that just don't like Apple. I'm not an Apple shill, and I don't agree with many of their decisions, but misinformation is misinformation, and it's really important not to share things you don't fully understand. And there seems to be a lot of confusion and not enough clarity about what happened, because I had to go through a rabbit hole to figure out what was going on. Here's what happened. Basically, a free and open source app called OpenSCAD, which is basically a free version of AutoCAD, wouldn't run in macOS Sequoia, failing with this message. This snowballed into a claim that big tech was at war with sideloading and that Apple would eventually force all Mac apps to be obtained through the App Store, like they do on iOS. Also, this definition of sideloading. The act of installing software on a real computer. That's just called installing. You know? If you're someone who's looking for information about this issue, like me, this isn't helpful at all. And just to be clear, this issue does not affect the vast majority of users, and it does not affect the vast majority of apps, even apps that are not obtained through the App Store. You can still install apps from outside the App Store, and all of your commonly used apps, Chrome, Firefox, Spotify, Discord, Microsoft Office, the Adobe Suite, are completely unaffected. There are two concepts to note here: signing and notarization. Signing validates the identity of the app author and ensures the app hasn't been tampered with. Notarization is an extra verification check by Apple to guard against malware. It's easy to confuse one with the other because they're complementary, but they're two different things. First, signing. Code signing verifies the integrity of the app to show that it hasn't been tampered with. Think of it as like receiving a package with a tamper-resistant seal on it. If the seal hasn't been broken, you can be sure that no one has opened your package. Signing is generally done with a certificate to provide evidence of its validity, and it's this certificate that costs money, $99 a year for Apple's developer program. If an app is signed with a valid certificate from the developer, it shows that no one except the original developer has modified the code. Apple requires all apps to be signed before they can run, but this isn't actually anything new. Every Apple Silicon Mac, Macs with Apple's own processors instead of Intel, has required all apps be signed in order to run. Every Mac since 2020. This is nothing new. You could never run an unsigned app on an Apple Silicon Mac, and there was no way to bypass it. This isn't a change that was done recently in macOS Sequoia, just to be clear. Notarization is when a developer sends a copy of their app to Apple for verification. When you open an app for the first time, it checks to see if it has a valid signature, and if there's any malware, and if it's fine, then it allows you to open it. That's the reason for this dialogue when you open an app for the first time. Think of it as like a blue check mark from Apple that says, "We've reviewed this app, and it is safe." So, signing tells you that only the app developer has modified the app, and notarization is Apple verifying it. If the app is not notarized, you're told that the app couldn't be verified and are prompted to delete it. Apple has been requiring apps to be notarized since macOS Catalina back in 2019. Definitely not news. The thing is though, you can bypass this check and run non-notarized apps. You just need to take a few extra steps. Go to System Settings, then Privacy and Security, then scroll down to where it says App was blocked from use because it is not from an identified developer, and select Open Anyway. Alternatively, right-click on the app and select Open. And it's this second option that Apple removed in macOS Sequoia, which they announced in August, a month before release, and it was a day 1.0 change. This change was probably done because many malicious apps tell people to right-click on the app to open it, which, going into system settings should, in theory, make people think twice about doing it. How well that works is not the scope of this video. But here's the key. You can run non-notarized apps. They just need to be signed. Remember what I said earlier about how signing and notarization are two different things? Yeah. The issue with OpenSCAD is that it wasn't signed. That's why it couldn't run, and there was no option to bypass it. An app needs to be signed in order to run. But a signed app does not actually need to be notarized. Now, Apple's recommended way is that you sign your app with an Apple Developer Certificate, which costs $99 a year, and if you sign your app with an Apple Developer Certificate, you can notarize it, so you fulfill both requirements. But apps can be self-signed for free without an Apple Developer Certificate. It's not the recommended option, but it exists. A user on GitHub even provided instructions on how to self-sign the app, and blogger Howard Oakley has covered the topic of self-signing. A self-signed app doesn't have the same chain of trust that a valid certificate provides, which is why a malicious developer can just self-sign code and it would look indistinguishable from a non-malicious copy. But it is still technically considered a signed app, and so it will run on an Apple Silicon Mac, which, I've already mentioned, have never allowed unsigned code to run. Self-signed, non-notarized apps are common in low-budget, free and open-source projects, and from hobbyist developers. I have a few such apps on my computer, so it's not like I don't use them. The thing is though, when I first found out about this issue, I couldn't find any information on their GitHub repositories or Discord servers. Because the issue doesn't affect them. Their apps are self-signed, so while I do have to go through the extra steps, I can still run the apps. These scary titles just incite unnecessary fear and anger and confusion. Look, there's a lot of valid criticism about Apple. Predatory upgrade pricing, opposition to self-repair, mistreatment of workers, poor developer relations. But criticism formed from misinformation and driven by impulsive emotions just drains away at the credibility of said criticism. And it makes it harder to focus on the issues that Apple is rightly criticized for. So to recap, because I don't know how long this video has been going on for, an app that is both signed and notarized will give this prompt and can be opened normally. An app that is signed but not notarized will give this prompt, and starting in macOS Sequoia, the only way to open such apps is to go through system settings. The right-click trick does not work anymore. An app that is not signed is also not notarized and will not run at all. I have links to sources and reading materials in the description below. Special thanks to Howard Oakley from the Eclectic Light Company for all of his research. Alright, I need a glass of water.